You are warm at this very moment. Your internal body temperature is approximately 37 degrees Celsius, or 310 Kelvin on the absolute scale that physicists use to measure temperature. That warmth, currently radiating from your skin at this moment, is not produced by your body alone. It is rather the most recent expression of a thermodynamic process that began 13.8 billion years ago, when the entire observable universe was concentrated into a single region of unimaginable temperature and density, and that has been continuously cooling across the subsequent billions of years. The sensation of your own warmth, the heat that you feel pressing against the inside of your own skin, the infrared photons that your body is currently emitting into the room, you happen to occupy. Every single aspect of this thermal phenomenon is a direct causal continuation of the original event that created the universe. You are not separate from the cosmic temperature gradient. You are rather a localized region where that gradient happens to take the specific form of a conscious observer. The continuous conversation between your body heat and the Big Bang has never once stopped, and it cannot ever stop while you are alive. This investigation will examine that ongoing thermal conversation in substantial detail. The story begins with a fundamental problem that troubled physicists across the 19th century. Heat appeared to behave systematically differently from other physical phenomena. A hot object placed next to a cold object would always result in the hot object cooling down and the cold object warming up, never the reverse. A drop of ink falling into a glass of water would always disperse outward, never gather itself back into a single drop. A drinking glass that fell from a table would shatter on the floor, but no shattered glass had ever been observed to spontaneously assemble itself back into an intact glass and rise back onto the table. The behavior of heat seemed to point unambiguously in a specific direction across time, and physicists naturally wanted to understand what this consistent directional behavior actually meant. The German physicist Rudolf Clausius, working at the University of Bonn across the 1850s and 1860s, articulated what would subsequently become known as the second law of thermodynamics. Clausius introduced a quantity that he called entropy, derived from the Greek word for transformation, to capture the directional nature of heat flow in physical systems. The second law, in its simplest formulation, states that the total entropy of an isolated physical system never decreases over time. Heat flows spontaneously from hot regions to cold regions. Ordered states tend toward disordered states. Concentrated forms of energy tend to disperse into less concentrated forms across time. The arrow of time itself, in some genuinely deep sense, is connected to the increase of entropy. Clausius gave the new field of thermodynamics its founding equation in 1865, and famously summarized the situation in a single line. The total energy of the universe is constant, while the total entropy of the universe tends always toward a maximum value. The Austrian physicist Ludwig Boltzmann, working through the 1870s and 1880s in Vienna and Graz, gave entropy its statistical interpretation that has substantially shaped all subsequent understanding of thermodynamics. Boltzmann demonstrated mathematically that what we perceive as the second law is in fact the consequence of the underlying statistical behavior of vast numbers of microscopic particles in motion. A physical system tends toward higher entropy precisely because there are vastly more microscopic ways to be disordered than there are microscopic ways to be ordered. The probability of a shattered glass spontaneously reassembling itself is not strictly zero in principle, but it is so vanishingly small that we would never expect to observe it even across the entire age of the universe. Boltzmann's tomb in the central cemetery of Vienna carries his famous equation engraved upon it as a memorial: S equals K log W, relating thermodynamic entropy to the logarithm of the number of microscopic configurations consistent with any given macroscopic state. The Boltzmann equation is one of the genuinely deepest equations in all of physics, connecting the everyday behavior of heat to the underlying statistical structure of matter itself. The temperature that you feel right now, the warmth of your own body, is in this framework not a separate phenomenon from the second law of thermodynamics, but rather a direct expression of it. Temperature is fundamentally a measure of the kinetic energy of the molecules that constitute matter at the microscopic level. The higher the temperature of a substance, the faster on average the molecules within it are moving, vibrating, and rotating. Your body at 310 Kelvin is a vast, complex collection of molecules in constant, ceaseless motion, and the warmth you continuously perceive is your nervous system's way of registering this underlying microscopic agitation. James Clerk Maxwell, the Scottish mathematical physicist working primarily at Cambridge in the 1860s and 1870s, derived the precise statistical distribution of molecular velocities in any gas at thermal equilibrium, with the resulting Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution becoming foundational for all subsequent statistical mechanics. The kinetic theory of heat, developed across the 19th century through the substantial work of Maxwell, Boltzmann, and others, established conclusively that temperature is not a fluid or a substance in itself, but is rather the statistical behavior of countless particles in continuous motion. What this thermodynamic picture means for your own existence is substantial. Maintaining your body temperature requires constant, continuous energy input. The food you consume is broken down through chemical processes that release energy, much of which eventually becomes the kinetic energy of the molecules within your tissues. You are continuously burning chemical fuel through metabolic processes to keep your molecules moving at the precise average rate that produces your 310 Kelvin body temperature. The heat continuously radiating from your skin represents energy that your body has captured through metabolic processes and is now actively releasing into the cooler surrounding environment around you. You are, in the most literal physical sense possible, a small biological furnace, processing chemical energy and continuously releasing thermal heat into the surrounding world. But the larger story becomes substantially more interesting when we begin to ask where the original heat actually came from in the first place. The heat in your body did not simply appear out of nothing. It comes ultimately from the chemical energy stored in your food, which comes from the energy that plants captured from sunlight through the process of photosynthesis, which comes from the nuclear fusion processes occurring continuously in the core of the sun, which were initiated originally by the gravitational collapse of hydrogen gas clouds in the early universe, which traces back ultimately to the original thermal conditions established at the Big Bang. The heat in your body has a continuous causal lineage, extending back through every successive stage of cosmic and biological evolution, all the way back to the original event that created the universe itself. The warmth you feel right now is the most recent terminus of a continuous thermal process that has no other beginning we can identify. The contemporary picture of cosmic thermal history was established through one of the most consequential accidental discoveries in the entire history of science. In 1964, two radio astronomers working at the Bell Telephone Laboratories facility in Holmdel, New Jersey, were attempting to use a sensitive horn antenna originally designed for satellite communication to detect faint radio signals from our Milky Way galaxy. Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson eventually found that no matter where they pointed their sensitive antenna, and no matter what they did to eliminate every conceivable source of interference, they could not eliminate a persistent low-level background signal corresponding to a temperature of approximately 3 Kelvin, which is about 3 degrees above absolute zero. They famously cleaned the pigeon droppings out of the antenna apparatus. They considered every possible source of contamination they could think of. The persistent, unexplained signal stubbornly remained. The persistent signal that Penzias and Wilson could not eliminate turned out to be the cosmic microwave background radiation, the thermal radiation left over from the early hot phase of the universe. The theoretical prediction of this radiation had been made by George Gamow, Ralph Alpha, and Robert Herman as early as 1948, with subsequent refinements through the 1950s and early 1960s. When the early universe was approximately 380,000 years old, it had finally cooled enough for protons and electrons to combine into stable neutral hydrogen atoms, an event called recombination. Before this critical point, the universe was an opaque plasma in which photons could not travel freely between charged particles. After this critical recombination point, the photons that had been bouncing around within the plasma were suddenly free to travel through space, thereby filling all of space uniformly with the thermal radiation we now detect. As the universe continued to expand over the subsequent 13.8 billion years, this primordial radiation cooled gradually with the cosmic expansion, dropping from its original temperature of approximately 3000 Kelvin at recombination down to its current measured temperature of 2.725 Kelvin. The 1964 discovery of the cosmic microwave background by Penzias and Wilson, who together shared the 1978 Nobel Prize in Physics for this discovery, transformed cosmology almost overnight from a largely speculative discipline into a fully empirical science. The Big Bang framework had previously been just one possible cosmological framework among several competing alternatives. The discovery of the predicted thermal radiation from the early universe, with very nearly the precise temperature predicted by the theoretical framework, provided the empirical foundation that the alternative cosmological frameworks simply could not match. The steady-state theory of cosmology advocated by Fred Hoyle and his collaborators had no comparable natural explanation for the cosmic microwave background, and the Big Bang framework rapidly became the standard cosmological model accepted across the scientific community. The substantial subsequent investigation of the cosmic microwave background has been one of the great achievements of contemporary observational cosmology across the past several decades. The Cosmic Background Explorer satellite, called COBE, launched by NASA in 1989, made the first truly precise measurements of the detailed spectrum and structure of the cosmic microwave background. The principal investigators of the COBE mission, John Mather and George Smoot, together shared the 2006 Nobel Prize in Physics for the COBE results. The blackbody spectrum was first derived by Max Planck in 1900 through his foundational work on quantum theory, with the spectrum representing the thermal radiation emitted by an idealized object in thermal equilibrium with its environment. The COBE measurements established definitively that the cosmic microwave background has very nearly the spectrum of a perfect Planckian blackbody at temperature 2.725 Kelvin, with the small deviations from perfect uniformity occurring at the level of approximately 1 part in 100,000. One of the most striking features of the cosmic microwave background is its remarkable uniformity. The temperature of the radiation arriving from any direction in the sky differs from any other direction by no more than approximately 1 part in 100,000. This uniformity poses a substantial puzzle for cosmology, because regions of the sky that we now observe in opposite directions could not have been in causal contact at the time the radiation was emitted, given the finite speed of light and the age of the universe. The horizon problem, as it is known, prompted Alan Guth's 1981 proposal of cosmic inflation, the hypothesis that the very early universe underwent a brief period of exponential expansion that brought regions into thermal equilibrium before they were stretched apart. The small variations in the cosmic microwave background that COBE first detected and that subsequent missions have mapped in extraordinary detail are believed to be the seeds of all subsequent cosmic structure, the galaxies, stars, and ultimately the planet on which you exist, all trace back to these tiny initial variations in the temperature of the early universe. The Wilkinson Microwave Anisotropy Probe, called WMAP, launched by NASA in 2001, provided substantially higher resolution measurements of the small temperature variations observable across the sky. The Planck satellite, launched by the European Space Agency in 2009 and operating until 2013, has provided the highest precision measurements currently available, mapping the cosmic microwave background to extraordinary precision across the entire full sky. The cosmic microwave background that contemporary cosmology has measured to such remarkable precision is not a distant or spatially separated phenomenon. It is in fact filling the room you currently occupy at this very moment. At every passing moment, photons from the cosmic microwave background are striking your body and being absorbed by your skin and surrounding surfaces. The sheer number of these primordial photons is genuinely staggering. There are approximately 400 photons of cosmic microwave background per cubic centimeter throughout the entire observable universe. In the volume of space that currently contains your body, there are billions upon billions of these primordial photons. They are not abstract theoretical entities, but are real physical radiation passing through and around you absolutely constantly. You exist continuously within a bath of thermal photons left over directly from the early hot universe, and your own body is in continuous thermal interaction with this primordial bath of radiation. The thermal interaction is not actually symmetrical. Your living body at 310 Kelvin is much warmer than the cosmic microwave background sitting at 2.725 Kelvin. Heat always flows spontaneously from warmer regions to cooler regions, so your body is continuously losing thermal energy to the surrounding cooler environment, including ultimately the cosmic microwave background itself. The infrared photons that your body continuously radiates outward represent energy leaving your body and entering the cooler universe around you. In the complete absence of food intake, in the absence of metabolic activity to replenish the energy continuously lost, your body would gradually cool toward thermal equilibrium with the surrounding environment. The fact that you continuously maintain a stable body temperature substantially above the cosmic microwave background represents an entirely continuous active process rather than any kind of passive equilibrium state. The thermodynamic situation in which you continuously exist has been the subject of substantial, sustained reflection across the contemporary scientific literature. The Belgian physical chemist Ilya Prigogine, who shared the 1977 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his foundational work on non-equilibrium thermodynamics, articulated the influential framework of dissipative structures, meaning organized physical systems that maintain their internal order through the continuous flow of energy. Any living organism is fundamentally a dissipative structure. The substantial order that constitutes your body, the precise organization of your cells and tissues and organs, is maintained against the universal thermodynamic tendency toward disorder only through the continuous active processing of energy and matter. You are not actually violating the second law of thermodynamics simply by existing. You are continuously exporting entropy to the surrounding environment at a rate that exceeds the rate at which entropy is being produced within your body, with the net result being increased total entropy in the universe overall, even as the localized order within your body is maintained. The Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger, one of the central founders of quantum mechanics, articulated essentially the same insight in different terms in his important 1944 book, What is Life? Schrödinger argued explicitly that living organisms feed on what he called negative entropy, drawing organized structure from the surrounding environment to continuously maintain the highly ordered state that biological life requires. The food you continuously consume is not merely fuel in a purely energetic sense. It is also concentrated low-entropy structure that your body uses to actively maintain its own low-entropy organization. The waste products that you produce are substantially higher in entropy than the food that you originally took in, with the difference representing the order that has been incorporated into your body and the corresponding disorder that has been exported back into the surrounding world. This thermodynamic framework places your continued existence into a particular larger cosmic context. The universe overall is continuously moving towards states of higher entropy, with local structures like galaxies, stars, planets, and individual living organisms being islands of relatively low entropy that are maintained only through the continuous flow of energy from sources of even lower entropy. The Sun is continuously burning through its hydrogen fuel reserves, gradually decreasing its concentrated energy supply. The Earth is continuously intercepting a small fraction of this solar energy and using it to maintain biological life across the planet. Your individual body is just one small piece of this much larger process, continuously drawing low entropy energy from the Earth's biosphere and using it to maintain the localized order that constitutes your existence as a conscious being. The cosmic microwave background represents one specific boundary condition of this larger process, with the gradually cooling universe providing the temperature gradient against which all biological life on Earth ultimately operates. The cosmic microwave background is not the only direct thermal connection between your body and the early universe. The atoms that currently constitute your body were forged in stellar nucleosynthesis processes, with the lighter elements being produced earlier in Big Bang nucleosynthesis during the first 3 minutes of cosmic thermal history. The hydrogen atoms in your body, comprising approximately 10% of your total body mass at any moment, has remained essentially unchanged since approximately 3 minutes after the original Big Bang event. The Big Bang nucleosynthesis framework, developed by Gamow and his collaborators in the 1940s and refined extensively in subsequent decades, predicts the relative abundances of the lightest elements that should have been produced during the first 3 minutes of cosmic thermal history. The predicted abundances of hydrogen, helium, and trace amounts of lithium agree with observed cosmic abundances to remarkable precision, providing one of the strongest pieces of empirical support for the Big Bang framework. When you drink water, you are drinking hydrogen atoms that have existed essentially unchanged for the full 13.8 billion years of cosmic history. When you continuously breathe, the oxygen molecules entering your lungs were originally produced in stellar nucleosynthesis processes that operated long before the Earth had even formed in the first place. Your individual body is a temporary localized configuration of matter that has been participating in the larger cosmic thermal economy since the very beginning of cosmic time itself. The accumulated contemplative traditions across cultures have engaged the relationship between breath, warmth, and the deeper structure of reality for thousands of years before contemporary thermodynamics could even measure the cosmic microwave background. Their accumulated accounts have framed warmth and breath as not merely biological phenomena, but as direct connections to deeper levels of reality that exceed the purely biological dimension. The convergence between these accumulated traditional accounts and the contemporary scientific picture deserves substantial sustained attention, with the contemporary precise measurements providing specific empirical content for what the traditions have been articulating across the millennia of accumulated reflection. The Hindu tradition contains the foundational concept of prana, articulated in the ancient Upanishads and developed extensively across the subsequent yogic and Vedantic literature. The concept of prana refers to the vital force that animates living beings, but the concept is by no means merely biological in scope. Prana is understood as the cosmic life energy that flows through all of reality continuously, with the breath of any individual creature being just one specific localized expression of the universal cosmic prana. The Hindu tradition has developed elaborate, sophisticated practices for working with prana through systematic breath control, called pranayama in Sanskrit, with the underlying assumption that working with the breath is simultaneously working with cosmic energy itself at the deepest level. The contemporary thermodynamic picture, in which the warmth of your body is continuous with the thermal history of the entire universe, aligns directly with what the Hindu contemplative tradition has been articulating about prana for more than 3,000 years of sustained reflection. The Taoist tradition of ancient China contains a closely related foundational concept in qi, articulated in the foundational Tao Te Ching, and developed across the subsequent extensive Taoist tradition. The concept of qi refers to the underlying vital energy that flows continuously through all of reality, manifesting in individual living beings as the warmth and animation that we recognize as life. The Tao Te Ching uses the powerful image of the bellows to describe the cosmos. The universe is described as being like a great cosmic bellows, empty yet inexhaustible. With the more it moves, the more it continuously produces. The image captures something that contemporary thermodynamics also captures in a different vocabulary. The universe is a vast thermal system in which energy flows absolutely continuously, with local manifestations like the warmth of a living body being specific expressions of the larger, underlying thermal economy. The Taoist intuition that breath, warmth, and cosmic flow are all continuous with one another finds direct, substantial empirical support in the contemporary scientific picture. The Christian theological tradition has developed extensive, sustained engagement with the relationship between breath, spirit, and divine presence in creation. The Hebrew word ruach and the Greek word pneuma both carry the multiple meanings of breath, wind, and spirit simultaneously, with this conceptual unity being reflected directly throughout the biblical texts. Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 describes the Spirit of God moving over the face of the waters at the very moment of creation, with the same Hebrew word ruach being used for the divine creative activity and for the breath that animates all living creatures. Genesis chapter 2 verse 7 describes God forming the first human being from the dust of the ground and then breathing the breath of life directly into the nostrils, with this divine breath being precisely what makes the human being a genuinely living soul. The deep intuition that breath is not merely a biological function, but is intimately connected to the divine creative activity, has shaped substantial Christian theological reflection across 2,000 years of sustained engagement. The account of Pentecost in the Acts of the Apostles describes the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles in the form of a rushing wind and tongues of fire, with the imagery uniting breath, wind, and warmth into a single unified theological symbol. The development of pneumatology, the theological doctrine concerning the Holy Spirit across the subsequent Christian tradition, has continued to draw on this fundamental unity of breath, wind, and divine presence. The Eastern Orthodox tradition, particularly through the Hesychast tradition associated with Mount Athos, has developed contemplative practices in which sustained attention to the breath becomes the means of access to divine presence, with the prayer of the heart being coordinated with the natural rhythm of breathing. The Buddhist contemplative tradition has developed perhaps the most refined practical engagement with the phenomenon of breath in any contemplative tradition across cultures. Anapanasati, the practice of mindfulness of breathing, was taught directly by the Buddha himself and has been developed extensively across the subsequent Buddhist literature into elaborate, sophisticated practices for using sustained attention to the breath as a means of investigating the Buddha, deeper nature of reality itself. The breath is consistently presented in Buddhist philosophical analysis as one of the most direct points of access to the actual nature of existence, with sustained close attention to the breath, revealing features of reality that ordinary unfocused awareness simply cannot access. The Buddhist analysis of the four great elements of physical reality, earth, water, fire, and air, treats the warmth of the body specifically as the manifestation of the fire element, the Tejas Dhatu in Sanskrit, in human existence. The substantial convergence between this ancient Buddhist analysis and the contemporary thermodynamic understanding of body temperature deserves substantial sustained attention. The pre-Socratic Greek philosopher Heraclitus of Ephesus, working in the late 6th and early 5th centuries before the Common Era, articulated frameworks that anticipated certain features of the contemporary thermodynamic picture in striking ways. Heraclitus held that fire was the fundamental principle of reality, with all things being transformations of fire and the cosmos being characterized by ceaseless flow and change. The famous saying attributed to Heraclitus that one cannot step into the same river twice captures the same intuition that contemporary thermodynamics also captures. Reality is a process of continuous flow and transformation rather than a static structure. The convergence between Heraclitean philosophy and contemporary thermodynamics has been noted by various commentators across the philosophical literature across the past century. The Stoic philosophical tradition that developed from Heraclitean foundations across the 3rd century before the Common Era and the subsequent centuries developed the concept of pneuma into a sophisticated framework in which a cosmic warm breath suffuses all of reality, with the warmth and animation of individual living beings being specific localized expressions of the universal pneuma. The convergence between Stoic pneuma and the contemporary thermodynamic picture, with both frameworks treating warmth as a feature continuous across cosmic and personal scales, deserves attention as one of the more striking historical anticipations of contemporary scientific findings. The Islamic tradition contains its own substantial engagement with the relationship between breath and the divine creative principle. The Quranic teaching that God breathed of his own spirit into the human being at creation, found in Surah al-Hijr and elsewhere, establishes the foundational framework. The Sufi mystical tradition developed this insight extensively, with the great 13th century master Ibn Arabi articulating in his Futuhat al-Makkiyah the doctrine of the nafas al-Rahman, the breath of the merciful, through which God continuously breathes creation into existence at every moment. On Ibn Arabi's framework, the universe is not a static structure created once in the past, but is continuously being breathed into existence by the divine, with each moment representing a fresh exhalation of the divine breath. The convergence between this Sufi metaphysical framework and the contemporary thermodynamic picture of continuous energy flow deserves serious attention. These accumulated traditional frameworks will be examined in greater detail across the subsequent investigation that follows. The contemporary thermodynamic picture provides specific empirical content for what the contemplative traditions have been articulating across thousands of years of accumulated sustained reflection. The warmth that you currently feel pressing against the inside of your own skin is not actually separate from the larger cosmic thermal economy, but is rather one specific, localized expression of it. The breath continuously moving in and out of your lungs is not merely biological respiration, but is direct participation in the larger continuous flow of energy and matter through the universe. The contemplative traditions have been articulating these deep connections for millennia. The contemporary precise measurements have now begun to provide the specific empirical content that confirms in detail what the contemplative traditions have been saying about the deep connection between the warmth of human existence and the deeper structure of cosmic reality itself. The thermal conversation between your living body and the early universe operates through specific physical mechanisms that deserve careful, sustained examination. The cosmic microwave background is not merely a curious historical artifact left over from the Big Bang event. It is rather an active participant in the thermal economy of the present moment. with its specific structural features carrying information about some of the deepest questions in contemporary cosmology and connecting directly to the conditions that allow your existence. The investigation of these underlying mechanisms reveals features of reality that ordinary unreflective experience simply cannot access, with the convergence between contemporary physics and accumulated traditional wisdom becoming substantially more striking as the technical details emerge. The first major feature deserving attention is the genuinely remarkable uniformity of the cosmic microwave background. The temperature of the radiation arriving from any direction in the sky differs from the temperature of the radiation arriving from any other direction by no more than approximately 1 part in 100,000 of a degree. This extraordinary level of uniformity is itself a physical puzzle of substantial theoretical depth. Regions of the sky that we now observe in directly opposite directions are separated by distances that substantially exceed the distance light could have travelled since the original Big Bang. These distant regions could not have been in causal contact at the time the cosmic microwave background was originally emitted. Yet they all have nearly identical measured temperatures. The horizon problem, as cosmologists call this puzzle, asks precisely how regions that have apparently never been in any causal contact came to be in such extraordinarily precise thermal equilibrium with each other. The standard contemporary response to the horizon problem is the theoretical framework of cosmic inflation, originally proposed by Alan Guth at Stanford and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1981, and developed extensively by André Linde of Stanford, Paul Steinhardt of Princeton, Andreas Albrecht, and others through the subsequent decades. The inflation theoretical framework proposes that the very early universe underwent a brief period of dramatic exponential expansion, with the volume of space increasing by a factor of approximately 10 to the 78th power in approximately 10 to the negative 34th power of a second. Before this inflationary period, the regions that would later become widely separated were in close causal contact and had reached thermal equilibrium with each other. Cosmic inflation then stretched these thermally equilibrated regions to enormous distances rapidly, with the result being the remarkable uniformity that we now observe across the cosmic microwave background. The inflation framework has substantial empirical support, including the predicted spectrum of small variations across the cosmic microwave background, but it remains an active area of theoretical and observational research with many open questions still to be resolved. The small temperature variations across the cosmic microwave background that COBE first detected, and that subsequent missions have mapped in extraordinary detail, represent something of profound importance for your own existence. The cosmic microwave background variations carry detailed information about the conditions of the early universe at the moment of recombination, with the patterns showing acoustic oscillations that occurred in the primordial plasma before recombination. These primordial sound waves, propagating through the hot, dense plasma of the early universe, left their imprints on the cosmic microwave background as alternating regions of compression and rarefaction. The detailed analysis of these acoustic patterns has provided extraordinarily precise measurements of the basic cosmological parameters, the age of the universe, the composition of matter and energy, the geometry of space, and the overall density of the cosmos. These temperature variations, of approximately 1 part in 100,000 in magnitude, correspond to small variations in the density of matter and radiation in the early hot universe. The slightly denser regions of the early universe experience slightly stronger gravitational attraction, drawing in additional matter over substantial timescales. The slightly less dense regions correspondingly lost matter to the denser regions. Over the subsequent 13.8 billion years of cosmic history, these small initial temperature variations grew into the substantial cosmic structures we now observe: the galaxies, galaxy clusters, individual stars, planets, and ultimately the specific planet on which you currently exist. The patterns visible in the cosmic microwave background are not merely maps of the early universe, They are rather maps of the primordial seeds from which all subsequent cosmic structure has grown. The Earth itself is a structure that grew from one specific small variation in temperature that existed 13.8 billion years ago. The thermal radiation that you continuously emit from your living body operates according to the same fundamental physical laws that govern the cosmic microwave background itself. Your body, being substantially warmer than its surrounding environment, radiates thermal photons outward in a continuous spectrum determined by your body temperature. The Stefan-Boltzmann law, derived empirically by Josef Stefan at the University of Vienna in 1879, and given theoretical foundation by Ludwig Boltzmann in 1884, establishes that the total thermal energy radiated by any black body is proportional to the fourth power of its absolute temperature. Your body at 310 Kelvin radiates substantially more thermal energy per unit time than any object at lower temperature. The infrared photons continuously leaving your skin carry energy away from your body, transferring it to the surrounding environment and ultimately to the cosmic microwave background itself. The Wien displacement law, derived by Wilhelm Wien in Berlin in 1893, establishes the precise mathematical relationship between the temperature of any black body and the wavelength at which it radiates most strongly. Cooler objects radiate predominantly at longer wavelengths. Your living body at 310 Kelvin radiates most strongly in the infrared portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, specifically at a peak wavelength of approximately 10 micrometers. The cosmic microwave background at 2.725 Kelvin radiates most strongly at a peak wavelength of approximately 1 millimeter, which is well into the microwave region of the spectrum. The COBE measurements establish that the cosmic microwave background spectrum agrees with the theoretical Planckian blackbody spectrum to better than 50 parts per million across the frequency range that COBE could measure. This is the most precise blackbody spectrum that has ever been measured anywhere in nature. Your body and the cosmic microwave background occupy different regions of the electromagnetic spectrum, but both radiate according to the same fundamental Planckian blackbody physical law. You are essentially a biological blackbody radiator. The cosmic microwave background is a near-perfect blackbody radiation field. The same fundamental physics describes both phenomena precisely. The thermodynamic situation in which you currently exist becomes substantially more interesting when we consider the broader, long-term trajectory of the universe. The universe is currently dominated by matter, with stars and galaxies actively producing energy through nuclear fusion and gravitational collapse processes. But this current matter-dominated state is fundamentally temporary on cosmic timescales. The hydrogen nuclear fuel in stars will eventually be exhausted across cosmic time. The currently bright universe will gradually fade as star formation slows and eventually ceases entirely. Over time, scales of approximately 10 to the 14th power years, much longer than the current age of the universe of approximately 14 billion years, all stellar fuel will be consumed, and the cosmos will enter what some cosmologists have called the degenerate era of cosmic history, in which the bright stars of the current epoch will have given way to faint white dwarfs, neutron stars, and black holes. The eventual thermodynamic fate of the universe has been the subject of substantial, sustained theoretical investigation across the past century and a half. The theoretical framework most widely discussed is the heat death of the universe, originally articulated by Lord Kelvin in Glasgow and Hermann von Helmholtz in Berlin in the 19th century, and developed extensively across subsequent cosmological theoretical work. The discovery in 1998 by the research teams led by Saul Perlmutter at Berkeley and by Brian Schmidt and Adam Rees that the expansion of the universe is actually accelerating rather than decelerating, for which they shared the 2011 Nobel Prize in Physics, has substantially modified the contemporary understanding of cosmic thermal evolution. The accelerating expansion is driven by what physicists call dark energy, a mysterious component of the universe whose nature remains one of the deepest open questions in contemporary physics. The accelerating expansion will eventually carry distant galaxies beyond the cosmological horizon, with each region of the cosmos becoming increasingly isolated as time passes. On the heat-death framework, the universe will eventually reach a final state of maximum entropy, in which all temperature differences across space have been erased, all available concentrated energy has been thoroughly dispersed, and no thermodynamic work can be performed by any system. The current epoch in which biological life can exist represents a brief, temporary window within the much longer cosmic history, with the conditions for life being possible only because the universe has not yet reached its eventual thermodynamic equilibrium state. The connection between thermodynamics and the direction of time is one of the deepest questions in physics. Sir Arthur Eddington, the British astrophysicist whose 1919 expedition confirmed Einstein's general relativity, articulated in his important 1928 book, The Nature of the Physical World, that the second law of thermodynamics holds what he called the supreme position among the laws of nature precisely because it specifies the direction in which physical processes actually occur. Eddington introduced the famous metaphor of the arrow of time to describe this directional asymmetry, with subsequent generations of physicists exploring the deep connections between thermodynamic asymmetry, the apparent flow of time in conscious experience, and the direction of cosmic evolution. The fact that you can remember the past but not the future, that the processes in your body lead from order to disorder, that your conscious experience moves continuously from earlier moments to later moments. All of these features of your existence are intimately connected to the underlying thermodynamic asymmetry that the second law describes. The thermodynamic framework places your existence in a particular larger cosmic context. You exist during one specific epoch of cosmic history, when temperature gradients between energy sources and energy sinks are still available to support biological life. The Sun is continuously providing concentrated low-entropy energy that the Earth's biosphere uses to maintain its biological order. The cosmic microwave background is providing the eventual cold sink against which this concentrated energy ultimately disperses. The temperature gradient between the Sun's surface at approximately 5,700 Kelvin and the cosmic microwave background at 2.725 Kelvin in the surrounding universe is the fundamental thermodynamic gradient that ultimately powers all biological life on Earth. Without this specific temperature gradient, life as we know it would not be possible at all. The conditions for your continued existence are tied directly to the specific thermal state of the universe at this particular cosmic epoch. The British mathematical physicist Roger Penrose at Oxford, who shared the 2020 Nobel Prize in Physics for his foundational work on black holes and general relativity, has articulated what he calls the past hypothesis as one of the most fundamental unresolved puzzles in contemporary physics. The past hypothesis observes that the entropy of the universe at the moment of the Big Bang was extraordinarily low, far lower than would be expected on conventional probabilistic grounds alone. This extraordinarily low initial entropy is precisely what makes the second law of thermodynamics meaningful in the first place. Entropy can increase across cosmic time only because it started extraordinarily low. But why was the initial entropy so extraordinarily low in the first place? Penrose has argued in his comprehensive book, The Road to Reality, and across his other major works, that the very low initial entropy is one of the most fundamental unresolved puzzles in contemporary cosmology, with the probability of such an extraordinarily low entropy state on standard probabilistic assumptions being approximately 1 chance in 10 to the power of 10 to the 123rd power, a number that exceeds any meaningful comparison with other physical quantities. The past hypothesis connects directly to the broader fine-tuning observation that contemporary physics has documented across many of the fundamental parameters of the universe. The universe that exists, the universe that allows for the existence of conscious observers such as yourself, requires extraordinarily specific initial cosmic conditions. The values of the fundamental physical constants must fall within remarkably narrow ranges. The initial cosmic entropy must have been extraordinarily low. The cosmic microwave background must have been emitted at precisely the right time, with precisely the right structural features for galaxies and stars to subsequently form. The accumulated empirical picture is that your existence at this present moment requires a genuinely remarkable concatenation of specific cosmic conditions, with each individual condition independently improbable on conventional probabilistic assumptions. The fine-tuning of the universe extends substantially beyond any single physical constant or cosmic parameter, with the entire structure of cosmic thermal history being apparently calibrated in substantial detail for the eventual emergence of conscious observers. The thermodynamic framework also connects substantively to what is sometimes called the demon of James Clerk Maxwell, a thought experiment that Maxwell originally introduced in 1867 that has shaped substantial subsequent reflection on the deep relationship between thermodynamics, information, and consciousness. Maxwell imagined a small intelligent being capable of observing individual gas molecules and selectively allowing fast molecules to pass through a barrier in one direction, only while allowing slow molecules to pass in the opposite direction only. Such an intelligent being could apparently create a temperature gradient from a system originally in thermal equilibrium, apparently violating the second law of thermodynamics in the process. The Maxwell demon thought experiment has generated substantial sustained subsequent reflection, with the eventual resolution involving the deep recognition that information itself has thermodynamic cost. The hypothetical demon must measure the molecules and store information about them somewhere, and the process of acquiring and storing such information has substantial thermodynamic implications that ultimately prevent any actual violation of the second law of thermodynamics. The connection between information and thermodynamics has been one of the most productive, substantive areas of physics across the past century. Claude Shannon, working at Bell Telephone Laboratories in 1948, articulated the foundational mathematical theory of information, with information itself being measured in mathematical units that turn out to be thermodynamically equivalent to entropy. The subsequent foundational work of Rolf Landauer at IBM Research in 1961 established that erasing information from any memory device necessarily produces heat, with the minimum thermodynamic cost being given by what is now called the Landauer limit in the literature. The connections between thermodynamics and information continue to produce substantial active research in contemporary physics, with implications for everything from the foundations of quantum mechanics to the practical theoretical limits of computation. The framework connects to your own existence in a particular and direct way. The information processing that occurs continuously in your nervous system necessarily requires the production of heat. Every individual thought, every perception, every act of attention involves the firing of neurons, with the underlying metabolic processes that support neural firing producing heat as an inevitable byproduct. Your brain, operating at approximately 310 Kelvin, is one of the most metabolically active organs in your body, consuming approximately 20% of the total energy your body expends, despite comprising only approximately 2% of your body mass. The conscious experience you are having right now, the sustained awareness you bring to these words, the integration of meaning and accumulated memory that constitutes your reading. At this moment, all of this conscious activity is being supported continuously by the production of heat in the neural tissue of your brain. A particularly striking aspect of the deep connection between thermodynamics and the structure of reality emerged through the work of Stephen Hawking at Cambridge University in the 1970s. Hawking's foundational theoretical work, building substantively on earlier insights from Jacob Bekenstein at Princeton University, established that black holes are genuinely thermodynamic objects with specific characteristic temperatures, entropies, and rates of thermal radiation. The Hawking temperature of a black hole is inversely proportional to its mass, with smaller black holes being substantially hotter than larger ones. The Bekenstein-Hawking entropy formula of a black hole expresses the entropy as proportional to the surface area of its event horizon, divided by 4 times the Planck area, rather than to its volume, suggesting fundamental deep connections between thermodynamics, gravity, and the geometric structure of space-time itself at the most basic level. The implications of this work for understanding the relationship between thermodynamics and the deepest structure of physical reality are still being explored across the contemporary theoretical literature, with substantial implications for understanding the relationship between information, gravity, and the cosmic thermal economy in which your body exists. Erik Verlinde, the Dutch theoretical physicist at the University of Amsterdam, he has developed in his 2010 paper On the Origin of Gravity and the Laws of Newton, and subsequent work, the controversial proposal that gravity itself may be an emergent thermodynamic phenomenon rather than a fundamental force, with the gravitational attraction we observe being a consequence of underlying thermodynamic and informational principles. Verlinde's theoretical framework remains controversial within the broader physics community, but it represents one substantive contemporary attempt to unify gravity and thermodynamics at the deepest level. If something like Verlinde's proposal turns out to be correct, then the warmth of your body and the gravitational attraction holding you to the surface of the Earth would be expressions of a single, underlying thermodynamic structure that pervades all of physical reality. The connection between consciousness and thermodynamics has been the subject of substantial theoretical investigation across the contemporary literature. The theoretical framework called integrated information theory, developed by Giulio Tononi at the University of Wisconsin-Madison since the early 2000s, attempts to characterize consciousness mathematically through the integration of information across a physical system. The integrated information theory framework remains substantially controversial and theoretically incomplete, but it points toward important connections between the thermodynamic and informational features of physical systems and the consciousness that some such systems are able to support. The accumulated evidence increasingly suggests that consciousness is not actually separate from the thermodynamic structure of physical reality, but is intimately and substantively connected to it, with the warmth of biological systems being one specific empirical feature of the larger integrated picture. The temperature of your body itself carries information that the accumulated contemplative traditions have long recognized. The slight warming or cooling sensations of the body during meditation, the warmth that spreads through the chest during certain intense emotional experiences, the cooling sensation that often accompanies certain states of release or recognition, these subtle phenomena have been carefully documented across the substantial contemplative literatures of multiple traditions. The Buddhist contemplative tradition has developed particularly refined, sustained attention to these thermal phenomena through specific practices that focus systematically on bodily sensation. The contemporary scientific investigation of meditation has substantially confirmed many of these traditional contemplative observations, with techniques such as functional magnetic resonance imaging and high-resolution infrared thermography documenting measurable changes in brain activity and body temperature during sustained contemplative practice. The Eastern Orthodox Hesychast contemplative tradition, particularly through the practices developed across Mount Athos and the broader Orthodox monastic tradition, has long emphasized the experience of inner warmth as a recognized sign of authentic contemplative practice. The 14th century theologian Gregory Palamas defended these contemplative practices and the practitioner's experience of divine light and warmth as genuine encounters with what he called the divine energies, in contrast to the Western Latin theological tradition that often treated such embodied experiences with greater suspicion. The convergence between this orthodox emphasis on contemplative warmth and the contemporary scientific documentation of thermal changes during meditation provides another genuinely interesting point of contact between accumulated traditional wisdom and contemporary empirical scientific investigation. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition contains particularly striking accumulated investigations of the relationship between contemplative practice and body temperature. The practice called tummo, developed extensively across Tibetan Buddhism over many centuries of sustained transmission, involves systematic generation of internal body heat through specific advanced meditative techniques. Practitioners of advanced tummo techniques can produce substantially measurable elevations in body temperature, sometimes substantial enough to dry wet sheets placed on their bodies in cold environmental conditions. The tummo practice has been studied scientifically, with researchers from Harvard Medical School and various other institutions documenting the substantial physiological changes that accompany the advanced practice. The traditional Tibetan account of tummo describes the practice as direct, sustained work with the inner thermal energies of the body, with the practitioner cultivating capacities that ordinary biology typically does not display. The substantial convergence between this traditional account and the contemporary scientific investigation of the practice deserves substantial sustained attention. The contemporary integrated picture that emerges across these various lines of investigation is genuinely striking. Your living body is a localized thermal system embedded within a vast cosmic thermal economy. The conditions for your continued existence depend on specific cosmic temperature gradients that have existed only during particular limited epochs of cosmic history. The thermodynamic processes that continuously support your consciousness produce continuous heat that ultimately disperses outward into the surrounding universe. The information processing continuously occurring in your brain has substantial thermodynamic costs that connect directly to the deepest questions about the relationship between mind and matter. The accumulated contemplative traditions have been articulating connections between warmth, consciousness, and cosmic structure for thousands of years, with the contemporary scientific picture now providing specific empirical content for what the traditions have been saying for millennia. The detailed mechanisms through which the cosmic microwave background interacts with your body operate continuously at the quantum mechanical level. Each one of the individual photons of cosmic microwave background that continuously strikes the surface of your skin transfers a small but real specific amount of energy and momentum directly to your body. The total number of these continuous quantum level interactions is genuinely staggering when considered in detail, with approximately 400 photons of cosmic microwave background per cubic centimeter throughout space, and with many tens of thousands of cubic centimeters in the volume occupied by your body. The total number of cosmic microwave background photons interacting with your body at any given moment is so vast as to defy easy enumeration. Your body is in continuous quantum level interaction with the thermal radiation left over directly from the Big Bang event. This is not metaphor or speculative framing. It is direct empirical fact, established firmly through contemporary cosmological measurement. The cosmic neutrino background represents another important thermal connection between your body and the early universe that deserves careful attention. The cosmic neutrino background was emitted approximately 1 second after the original Big Bang event, when the early universe was at approximately 1 billion Kelvin in temperature. As the universe subsequently expanded and cooled, the neutrinos emitted at this very early epoch decoupled from other forms of matter and began traveling freely through expanding space. The current measured temperature of the cosmic neutrino background is approximately 1.95 Kelvin, which is slightly cooler than the cosmic microwave background. The cosmic neutrino background has not yet been directly detected because of the extraordinarily weak interaction of neutrinos with ordinary baryonic matter, but its actual existence is confirmed indirectly through its observable effects on the cosmic microwave background and on Big Bang nucleosynthesis predictions. Approximately 100 trillion individual neutrinos from the cosmic neutrino background pass through your body in every passing second of time. The interactions are so extraordinarily weak that the cosmic neutrinos pass through almost entirely without any direct measurable effect on your biological tissues, but they are nevertheless present and continuously crossing through your body in vast numbers throughout your entire life. The quantum mechanical structure of the thermal interactions deserves additional attention. The vacuum of space is not actually empty in the sense that ordinary perception suggests. The contemporary picture of the quantum vacuum, developed extensively across the past century by figures including Paul Dirac, John Wheeler, and David Bohm, among many others, treats the vacuum as a dynamic structure containing virtual particles that continuously appear and disappear, zero-point energy that persists even at absolute zero temperature, and quantum fluctuations that establish the conditions for ordinary physical phenomena. The cosmic microwave background photons are not floating through an empty void, but through a quantum vacuum that has its own structural features. The thermal interactions between your body and the cosmic microwave background therefore occur within a much richer quantum mechanical context than classical thermodynamics alone would suggest. The contemporary integration of quantum mechanics, thermodynamics, and cosmology continues to produce active theoretical research, with ongoing implications for understanding the conditions under which conscious existence is possible. The thermal universe in which you continuously exist is therefore much richer in structure than ordinary unreflective perception suggests. You are continuously bathed in thermal photons left over directly from the early universe. You are crossed continuously by cosmic neutrinos from even earlier moments of cosmic history. You are continuously radiating your own thermal photons outward into the surrounding world. Your body is actively processing energy continuously to maintain the thermodynamic order that constitutes your conscious existence. The information processing continuously occurring in your brain produces heat that ultimately disperses outward into the cosmic thermal environment. Every aspect of your existence is actively participating in the larger cosmic thermal economy, and every aspect of this thermal participation has been continuously occurring since you first came into existence. The accumulated traditional accounts that engage these foundational phenomena across cultures will be examined in substantially greater detail across the subsequent investigation that follows. The Buddhist analysis of Tejas Dhatu, the Hindu analysis of prana and pranayama, the Taoist analysis of chi, the Christian theological analysis of pneuma and the Hebrew ruach, the Islamic Sufi analysis of the divine breath of mercy. All of these accumulated frameworks engage what contemporary thermodynamics is now documenting precisely through empirical measurement. The various traditions have used different specific vocabularies and have developed through different methodological frameworks, but the underlying territory they have been investigating is substantially the same as the territory contemporary physics is now mapping in detail. The substantive, sustained integration of these accumulated intellectual resources is one of the genuinely important intellectual tasks for any serious and thoughtful contemporary person seriously engaging with the deepest questions about the nature of conscious existence within a thermal cosmos. The contemplative traditions that have engaged these phenomena across thousands of years have left behind substantial accumulated literature that deserves careful, sustained reading. The contemporary physics has provided specific empirical content that confirms much of what the traditions have been articulating. The integration of these resources is genuinely your own task to undertake, with the combined wisdom of accumulated traditional reflection and contemporary precise measurement, providing substantial integrated resources for understanding what your warmth at this present moment actually means in the larger cosmic context. The accumulated contemplative traditions across the major cultures of the world have engaged the deep relationship between breath, warmth, and the underlying structure of reality with substantial sustained seriousness for thousands of years of accumulated reflection. The substantial accumulated accounts they have produced deserve substantive examination on their own terms, through the specific texts and practices they have actually produced across the centuries, rather than reduced to brief comparative summaries that often miss what is most distinctive and substantive about each individual tradition. The substantial depth of these accumulated traditional engagements, when examined carefully on their own terms, provides substantial intellectual resources for thinking about thermal existence that purely materialist scientific frameworks alone do not have available to them. The substantial convergence between these accumulated traditional accounts and the contemporary thermodynamic findings is itself genuinely substantial empirical evidence that something genuinely real about the deep nature of conscious thermal existence has been the consistent object of investigation across cultures and across many millennia of accumulated human history. The classical Hindu Sankhya philosophical school developed extensively across the centuries before the Common Era, a sophisticated systematic cosmology in which Prakriti, the fundamental material principle, manifests through the operation of three gunas, or qualities: sattva, associated with light and clarity, rajas, associated with motion and activity, and tamas, associated with mass and inertia. The warmth of any living being is understood within Sankhya as a specific manifestation of the rajas guna operating through the practitioner's particular combination of physical and mental characteristics. The accumulated substantial subsequent yogic literature drew extensively on this Sankhya framework, integrating its analytical categories with the practical contemplative methods of yoga. The Hindu philosophical and contemplative tradition contains perhaps the most extensively developed accumulated framework for understanding the deep relationship between breath, warmth, and cosmic energy. The foundational concept of prana, articulated first in the ancient Upanishads, composed in the centuries before the Common Era, and developed extensively across the subsequent yogic, Vedantic, and Tantric literature, refers to the vital life force that animates all living beings throughout the cosmos. The Sanskrit term derives from the prefix pra, meaning forth or forward, combined with the root an, meaning to breathe. The concept of prana is fundamentally connected to breath, but the concept extends substantially beyond the merely biological act of physical respiration. Prana is understood throughout the Hindu tradition as the cosmic life energy that flows continuously through all of reality, with the breath of any individual living creature being just one specific, localized expression of the universal cosmic prana that pervades all of existence. The Prashna Upanishad and the Chandogya Upanishad both contain particularly extensive sustained engagement with the deep nature of prana. The Prashna Upanishad presents an extended philosophical discussion of the relationship between prana and the various biological functions of the body, with prana being described as the fundamental underlying life force that supports all the more specific functions of breathing, digestion, circulation, and consciousness in the human being. The Chandogya Upanishad articulates the famous traditional teaching that prana is the eldest and the best, with the various senses and functions of the body being entirely unable to operate without the underlying support of the prana. The accumulated Upanishadic literature treats prana not as a metaphor or symbol for biological energy, but rather as an actual substantive feature of reality itself, that the contemplative practices of the tradition seek to engage directly through systematic discipline. The classical Hindu yogic tradition developed the systematic discipline of pranayama, the deliberate control and refinement of breath, as one of the central practices of yoga. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, composed in classical Sanskrit approximately 2,000 years ago, present pranayama as the fourth limb of the eight-limbed yoga path called Ashtanga Yoga, following the ethical disciplines of yama and niyama and the postural practices of asana, but preceding the more advanced practices of sense withdrawal, concentration, meditation, and the deep absorption called samadhi. Patanjali's brief but extraordinarily influential systematic treatment of pranayama establishes the foundational framework that has shaped subsequent Hindu and Buddhist contemplative traditions across the past 2 millennia of accumulated practice. The fundamental traditional insight is that the breath provides direct access to the underlying prana, and that systematic refinement of the breath, therefore, produces systematic refinement of the practitioner's substantive relationship to the cosmic life energy. The subsequent tantric tradition that developed across India in the centuries following Patanjali extended pranayama into elaborate, sophisticated, systematic practices involving the deliberate, sustained cultivation of internal body heat. The Kundalini Yoga tradition, developed across the medieval Indian period through the work of figures including Gorakhnath and his teacher Matsyendranath, holds that a powerful spiritual energy called Kundalini lies dormant at the base of the spine and can be deliberately awakened through specific, advanced, contemplative techniques involving sustained breath control, specific postures, detailed visualization, and concentrated attention. The awakening of Kundalini is described in the substantial traditional literature as producing substantial measurable elevations in body temperature, sometimes accompanied by intense experiences of substantial heat moving through the spine and throughout the body. The substantial convergence between these accumulated traditional accounts and the contemporary scientific documentation of body temperature changes during advanced contemplative practice has been noted across the comparative scholarly literature. The Bhagavad Gita, composed in classical Sanskrit approximately 2,000 years ago, and standing as one of the most influential spiritual texts of the entire Hindu tradition, contains substantial engagement with the deep relationship between breath, life, and divine ultimate reality. Lord Krishna's teaching to Arjuna in Chapter 4 describes the contemplative practice of offering the inhalation into the exhalation, and the exhalation into the inhalation, with this sustained contemplative breath practice being presented as one path among many for engaging the deeper underlying reality that underlies the manifest universe. The accumulated Bhagavad Gita teaching consistently presents the breath not merely as a biological function, but rather as one of the direct points of access to the divine ultimate reality that the entire tradition ultimately seeks to engage. The contemporary thermodynamic picture, in which the breath continuously connects you to the larger cosmic thermal economy, aligns directly with what the Bhagavad Gita has been articulating about the deeper significance of breath across more than 2,000 years. The Buddhist contemplative tradition has developed perhaps the most refined, sustained, practical engagement with the phenomenon of breath found in any contemplative tradition across cultures. Anapanasati, the practice of mindfulness of breathing, was taught directly by Siddhartha Gautama himself in the 5th century before the Common Era, after his awakening at Bodh Gaya, and is preserved in detailed systematic form in the Anapanasati Sutta within the foundational Pali Canon. The Buddha's specific instruction to his disciples involves systematic sustained attention to the breath as it moves naturally in and out of the body, with the practitioner cultivating sustained moment-to-moment awareness of the actual physical sensations of breathing, rather than thinking about the breath conceptually or abstractly. The practice is consistently presented in the Anapanasati Sutta as one of the most direct, effective approaches to liberation, with the Buddha himself attributing his complete enlightenment partly to the development of this contemplative practice during his years of sustained contemplative investigation before his final awakening. The systematic development of Anapanasati across the subsequent Buddhist tradition has produced substantial accumulated literature on the specific practical techniques and the experiential phenomena that arise during sustained breath practice. The substantial accumulated commentarial tradition, particularly through the work of Buddhaghosa, working in Sri Lanka in the 5th century, in his foundational Visuddhimagga, or Path of Purification, developed the systematic, detailed exposition of Anapanasati that has shaped subsequent Theravada Buddhist practice across the past 15 centuries of unbroken transmission. The Theravada tradition preserved in Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, and other Southeast Asian countries has maintained particularly detailed accumulated knowledge of Anapanasati through the unbroken transmission of meditation practice across more than 2,000 years of continuous sustained engagement. The Mahayana tradition that developed in China, Japan, Korea, and Tibet adapted Anapanasati into various distinctive, contemplative, practical forms, while preserving the fundamental traditional insight that sustained attention to the breath provides direct access to the deeper, underlying structure of existence. The Zen tradition's substantial emphasis on breath in Zazen, seated meditation practice. The Tibetan tradition's elaborate, sophisticated development of breath practices in Tantric yoga. The contemporary Western adaptation of Anapanasati through the mindfulness-based interventions movement. All of these are direct continuations of what the Buddha himself originally taught more than 2,000 years ago. The Buddhist analysis of the four great elements provides a particularly important systematic framework for understanding the warmth of the body in accumulated traditional terms. The substantial Abhidharma literature, the systematic philosophical analysis that developed across the various early Buddhist schools, identifies earth, water, fire, and air as the four primary fundamental elements that constitute physical reality. Each one of these elements is associated with a characteristic quality: earth with solidity and resistance, water with cohesion and fluidity, fire with heat and warmth, and air with motion and lightness. The fire element, called Tejas Dhatu in Sanskrit and Tejo Dhatu in the related Pali language, is specifically the principle of warmth and heat in any physical system. In human existence, the Tejas Dhatu manifests as the warmth of the body, the heat of digestion, the warmth that accompanies certain emotions, and the metabolic processes that continuously sustain life. The contemporary precise thermodynamic understanding of body temperature, in which the warmth of the body is continuous with the substantially larger cosmic thermal economy, aligns with remarkable precision with what the Buddhist contemplative tradition has been articulating about Tejas Dhatu for more than 2,000 years of accumulated reflection. The Buddhist philosophical analysis treats the warmth of the body not as a static property of biological matter, but rather as a dynamic continuous process of heat production and dissipation. The traditional practices of detailed contemplative analysis, in which the practitioner attends carefully to the actual sensations of warmth and coolness throughout the body, produce direct experiential knowledge of these thermal processes that contemporary thermodynamic theory now describes mathematically. The substantial convergence between these distinct but complementary approaches to the warmth of conscious human existence deserves substantial sustained attention. The Hindu medical tradition of Ayurveda, codified across the centuries through the Karaka Samhita, the Sushruta Samhita, and the substantial subsequent Ayurvedic medical literature developed elaborate, accumulated practical knowledge about the relationship between body warmth, digestion, and various forms of disease. The concept of Agni, the digestive fire, is central to Ayurvedic medical theory, with the strength and quality of Agni in any individual being treated as fundamental to overall health. The Ayurvedic framework developed sophisticated systematic methods for cultivating, balancing, and refining Agni through diet, daily routine, contemplative practice, and herbal medicine. The substantial convergence between this ancient medical tradition's emphasis on internal warmth and the contemporary thermodynamic understanding of metabolism deserves attention as one of the more striking examples of accumulated, traditional knowledge anticipating contemporary scientific findings. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition has developed particularly sophisticated practices for working directly with the inner thermal energies of the body. The tummo practice, mentioned briefly in the broader scientific discussion, involves systematic generation of internal heat through specific, advanced meditative techniques, combining visualization, breath control, and concentrated attention. The traditional accumulated literature on tummo, developed across many centuries within the Kagyu, Nyingma, and other Tibetan schools, describes the practice in technical detail that goes substantially beyond what can be communicated through brief summary. The famous 11th century Tibetan yogi Milarepa, perhaps the most celebrated single practitioner of tummo in the entire history of the tradition, is recorded in his accumulated traditional biography as having sustained himself through the harsh winters of the Tibetan highlands, wearing only a thin cotton cloth, with his sustained accumulated tummo practice generating sufficient internal heat to make ordinary clothing unnecessary. Practitioners of advanced tummo cultivate the capacity to produce measurable elevations in body temperature, with the Naropa traditional account describing the famous and influential 6 yogas of the Indian master Naropa, of which tummo is treated as the foundational practice, with the deliberately cultivated inner heat being treated as the necessary basis for the more advanced contemplative practices that the Tibetan tradition systematically cultivates. The substantial accumulated Christian theological tradition has developed extensive, sustained engagement with the deep relationship between breath, spirit, and divine presence across 2,000 years of accumulated theological reflection. The fundamental Christian theological framework rests on the substantial linguistic and conceptual unity between breath, wind, and spirit found in the original biblical languages. The Hebrew word ruach, occurring more than 370 times throughout the Hebrew Bible, carries the simultaneous interrelated meanings of breath, wind, and spirit, with the same Hebrew word being used for the breath of individual human beings, the wind moving through the natural world, and the Spirit of God in creation. The Greek word pneuma, used extensively throughout the New Testament writings, carries essentially the same range of interrelated meanings, with the conceptual unity being reflected directly in the developed theological vocabulary of the Christian tradition across centuries. The opening verses of the book of Genesis establish the foundational theological framework that has shaped subsequent Christian reflection. Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 famously describes the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters at the very beginning of creation, with the same Hebrew word ruach being used for the divine creative activity and for the breath that animates all living creatures. Genesis chapter 2 verse 7 describes God forming the first human being directly from the dust of the ground, and then breathing the breath of life directly into the nostrils of this newly formed creature, with this divine breath being precisely what makes the human being into a genuinely living soul, rather than merely an inert form of dust. The biblical framework consistently treats breath not merely as a biological function, but rather as a direct ongoing connection between human existence and the divine creative activity that brought the entire cosmos into being. The account of Pentecost in the second chapter of the Acts of the Apostles describes the dramatic descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles in the form of a rushing mighty wind and visible tongues of fire, with the imagery uniting breath, wind, and warmth into a single, unified, powerful theological symbol. The Christian theological tradition has consistently understood the Holy Spirit as a real, substantive, divine presence that is continuous with the breath that animates all living beings, rather than as a separate, isolated metaphysical category, with the conceptual unity of breath and spirit being substantially preserved in the developed theological vocabulary across 2,000 years of subsequent theological development. The development of pneumatology, the systematic accumulated theological doctrine concerning the Holy Spirit, has continued substantively to draw on this fundamental unity of breath, wind, and divine presence across the substantial Christian theological literature of the past 2 millennia. The Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition has developed perhaps the most sustained, substantial Christian engagement with breath in contemplative practice across its history. The hesychast contemplative tradition, developed across many centuries on Mount Athos in Greece and across the broader Eastern Orthodox monastic context, involves the systematic, continuous practice of the Jesus prayer, carefully coordinated with the natural rhythm of breathing. The practitioner repeats the Jesus prayer continuously while attending carefully to the natural rhythm of breath, with this sustained practice producing substantial accumulated literature on the various experiential phenomena that arise during sustained contemplative engagement. The 14th century Orthodox theologian Gregory Palamas, working initially at Mount Athos and subsequently serving as Archbishop of Thessaloniki, defended the hesychast practices against scholastic critics in his sophisticated extended theological treatises, articulating the developed doctrine of the divine energies that distinguishes between the entirely unknowable divine essence and the knowable divine energies that continuously permeate all of creation. The hesychast practitioner's experience of inner warmth and uncreated divine light on the Palamite developed framework represents genuine substantive encounter with the divine energies, rather than merely subjective psychological phenomena produced by the practitioner's own mind. The Western Christian mystical tradition has its own substantial engagement with thermal and breath imagery despite its distinct theological framing. Saint John of the Cross, the 16th century Spanish Carmelite Catholic mystic, articulated in his important works Living Flame of Love and Dark Night of the Soul, a sophisticated framework in which the divine love manifesting in the soul produces specific thermal experiences described in detail. Across his accumulated poetry and prose, Saint Teresa of Avila, his close spiritual contemporary and friend, similarly described in her foundational interior castle and her substantial autobiographical writings the experience of inner warmth that accompanied her authentic, sustained, contemplative engagement. The convergence between these Western Christian descriptions and the Eastern Orthodox hesychast accounts deserves attention as evidence of a genuine experiential phenomenon documented across the substantial geographical and theological diversity of the broader Christian tradition. The Taoist contemplative tradition of ancient China contains its own distinctive substantial framework for understanding breath, warmth, and cosmic flow. The foundational concept of qi, articulated systematically in the Tao Te Ching, attributed traditionally to Laozi, and developed extensively across the subsequent substantial Taoist tradition, refers to the underlying vital cosmic energy that flows through all of reality, manifesting in individual living beings as the warmth and animation that we ordinarily recognize as life. The The Chinese character for qi carries multiple interrelated layers of meaning that include breath, vapor, vital energy, and atmospheric flow, with the conceptual unity reflecting essentially the same deep intuition found in the Hebrew ruach and the Greek pneuma about the deep connection between breath and the cosmic vital force. The Tao Te Ching famously uses several powerful evocative images to describe the nature of qi and its operation throughout the cosmos. The genuinely famous traditional image of the bellows describes the cosmos itself as a great cosmic bellows, empty yet inexhaustible in capacity. With the more it moves, the more it continuously produces. The Taoist image captures something that contemporary thermodynamics also captures in entirely different technical vocabulary. The universe itself is a vast, continuous thermal system in which energy flows absolutely continuously, with local manifestations like the warmth of a living body being specific, localized expressions of the larger thermal cosmic economy. The Tao Te Ching also famously describes the Tao itself as the ultimate underlying source from which all things continuously emerge and to which all things eventually return, with qi being the fundamental medium through which the Tao operates throughout the manifest world. The subsequent Taoist tradition developed elaborate, sophisticated practical practices for working directly with qi, called qigong in contemporary terminology. The internal alchemy tradition, called naidan in Chinese, that emerged across the medieval Taoist tradition involves systematic, accumulated practices of breath control, concentration, visualization, and movement designed to refine the practitioner's qi and to cultivate what the tradition calls the inner elixir of immortality. The substantial traditional accumulated literature on naidan developed across many centuries through the work of figures including Zhang Boduan in the 11th century and Zhang Sanfeng in the medieval period, describes the practices in technical detail that parallels in genuinely striking ways the Tibetan Buddhist tummo tradition, with both these distinct contemplative systems treating the deliberate, sustained cultivation of internal heat as fundamental to advanced contemplative practice. The Neo-Confucian philosophical tradition that emerged in China across the 11th and 12th centuries through the substantial work of figures including Zhu Xi and Zhu Dunyi, integrated Taoist and Buddhist contemplative insights with classical, Confucian, ethical, and social philosophy. The accumulated Neo-Confucian framework treats qi as one of the most fundamental constituents of reality, alongside Lai, the underlying pattern or principle that systematically structures the manifest world. On the developed Neo-Confucian framework, the warmth of any living being is qi manifesting in accordance with Li, with the precise mathematical structure of physical reality reflecting the operation of Li at every level of cosmic order observable in nature. The substantial convergence between this Neo-Confucian metaphysical framework and the contemporary thermodynamic picture deserves substantial attention as one of the more striking historical anticipations of contemporary scientific findings. The Islamic intellectual tradition contains its own substantial, sustained engagement with the deep relationship between breath and the divine creative principle of creation. The foundational Quranic teaching that God breathed of His own Spirit into the human being at the moment of creation, found in Surah al-Hijr and in other Quranic passages, establishes the foundational Islamic theological framework. The substantial Sufi Islamic mystical tradition developed this foundational insight extensively across many centuries, with the great 13th century Andalusian master Ibn Arabi articulating perhaps the most influential mystical metaphysical framework. Ibn Arabi's massive multi-volume Futuhat al-Makkiyah, or Meccan Revelations, and his subsequent influential work Fusus al-Hikam, or Bezels of Wisdom, developed systematically the doctrine of the nafas al-Rahman, meaning the breath of the merciful, through which God continuously breathes the entire creation into existence at every single passing moment. On Ibn Arabi's developed metaphysical framework, the universe is not a static structure that was created once in the historical past, but is continuously being breathed into existence by the divine creative activity, with each present moment representing a fresh exhalation of the divine creative breath. The cosmos is therefore not at all separate from the divine creative activity, but is rather the ongoing, continuous expression of that activity at every passing moment. The breath of any individual creature is, on this developed Sufi framework, a localized direct participation in the universal divine breath that continuously sustains all of reality. The substantial convergence between this developed Sufi metaphysical framework and the contemporary thermodynamic picture of continuous energy flow through the cosmos deserves substantial sustained attention. Both these distinct frameworks treat reality as a process of continuous flow and transformation, rather than as a static structure of fixed, unchanging objects. The substantial accumulated Sufi tradition developed elaborate, sophisticated contemplative practices involving the breath, drawing directly on the developed metaphysical framework of the nafas al-Rahman. The practice of dhikr, the systematic remembrance of God through continuous repetition of the divine names, traditionally involves coordination with the natural rhythm of the breath, with each divine name being repeated on the inhalation or exhalation according to specific patterns developed across the various Sufi orders. The substantial traditional accumulated literature on Sufi breathing practices developed across many centuries through the work of figures, including Najm al-Din Kubra in the 13th century and his subsequent Kubrawi Sufi order, describes in detail the various experiential phenomena that arise during sustained engagement with these contemplative practices. The Jewish tradition has its own distinctive substantial engagement with the deep relationship between breath and cosmic order. The Hebrew word neshama, meaning both soul and breath, is closely related to ruach, but particularly emphasizes the higher spiritual dimension of human existence. Genesis chapter 2 verse 7 describes God breathing the neshama of life directly into the first human being, with the substantial rabbinic tradition treating this divine creative breath as establishing the unique spiritual dignity of human existence. The accumulated Talmudic tradition developed extensive sustained engagement with the relationship between breath and life, with the traditional morning prayer, Elohai Neshama, celebrating the divine restoration of the soul each morning as the practitioner returns to full consciousness from sleep. The substantial Kabbalistic mystical tradition developed perhaps the most elaborate Jewish engagement with the deeper structure of cosmic reality. The Lurianic Kabbalistic framework, developed through the substantial work of Isaac Luria in 16th century Safed in Galilee, presents creation as occurring originally through tzimtzum in Hebrew, meaning the divine contraction that produces the metaphysical space within which finite reality can exist, followed by the emanation of divine light into this space through structures called the Partzufim. The accumulated substantial Kabbalistic literature treats the divine names and the structural relationships within them as the actual structural features through which physical reality is constituted at every level of existence. The contemporary thermodynamic picture, in which all physical phenomena, including the warmth of the body, emerge from underlying mathematical and informational structural relationships, aligns in surprising ways with the Kabbalistic deep intuition that reality is structured by precise underlying relationships rather than by inert, unchanging matter. The pre-Socratic Greek philosopher Heraclitus of Ephesus, working at Ephesus in the late 6th and early 5th centuries before the Common Era, articulated philosophical frameworks that anticipated contemporary thermodynamic insights in genuinely striking ways. Heraclitus held that fire was the fundamental, underlying principle of reality, with all things being continuous transformations of this primordial fire and the entire cosmos being characterized by ceaseless flow and continuous change. The substantial Heraclitean fragments preserved across the ancient doxographical literature articulate a sophisticated picture of reality in which warmth and continuous transformation are not merely features of physical existence, but are the actual underlying structural features of the cosmos itself. The widely famous traditional saying, attributed to Heraclitus, that one cannot step into the same river twice, captures essentially the same deep intuition that contemporary thermodynamics also captures. The reality is fundamentally a process of continuous flow and transformation, rather than a static collection of fixed, unchanging objects. The substantial Stoic philosophical tradition that developed from Heraclitean foundations, beginning in the 3rd century before the Common Era and continuing through the subsequent centuries, developed the foundational concept of pneuma into a sophisticated systematic philosophical framework. On the developed Stoic account, a cosmic warm breath called pneuma suffuses all of reality, with the warmth and animation of individual living beings being just specific localized expressions of the universal cosmic pneuma. The Stoic philosophers treated the entire cosmos as a single integrated rational organism, with each individual living being functioning as a small constituent part of this larger living whole. The substantial convergence between Stoic pneuma and the contemporary thermodynamic picture, with both these distinct frameworks treating warmth as a continuous integrated feature across both cosmic and personal scales, deserves substantial attention as one of the more striking historical anticipations of contemporary scientific findings about the deeply integrated thermal nature of reality. The substantial convergence between these accumulated traditional accounts and the contemporary thermodynamic findings deserves substantial sustained attention. Different cultures across the ancient world, working through entirely different methodological traditions and from entirely different starting metaphysical assumptions about the nature of reality, have arrived independently at recognizably similar substantive accounts of the deep relationship between breath, warmth, and cosmic structure. The Hindu prana, the Buddhist tejas dhatu, the Christian pneuma and ruach, the Taoist chi and nidin, the Islamic nafas al-Rahman, the Jewish neshama, the Heraclitean fire and flux, the Stoic pneuma, these substantial, distinct traditional vocabularies all converge structurally on the recognition that the warmth of human existence is not merely an isolated biological phenomenon, but is continuous in some fundamental way with the deeper structure of reality itself. The contemporary precise measurements of the cosmic microwave background and the contemporary understanding of thermodynamic processes provide specific empirical content for what these contemplative traditions have been articulating across millennia of accumulated, sustained reflection. The integrated picture that has emerged across this entire investigation deserves careful, sustained summary before its full implications can be properly examined in their depth. Your living body, at 310 Kelvin, is a localized thermal system embedded continuously within a vast cosmic thermal economy that extends across 13.8 billion years of accumulated cosmic history. The cosmic microwave background at 2.725 Kelvin fills the room you currently occupy with primordial thermal radiation left over from the early hot universe, with billions of these primordial photons interacting continuously with your body at every single passing moment of your existence. The cosmic neutrino background passes through your living body at the genuinely staggering rate of approximately 100 trillion individual neutrinos per second, with these particles having decoupled from other matter approximately 1 second after the original Big Bang event. The atoms that constitute your body were forged in stellar nucleosynthesis processes, operating long before the Earth formed, with the hydrogen in your tissues having existed essentially unchanged for the full 13.8 billion years of accumulated cosmic history. The thermodynamic processes that maintain your conscious existence operate continuously according to the second law of thermodynamics, with your body functioning as a dissipative structure that maintains its localized order through the continuous processing of energy and the export of entropy to the surrounding cosmic thermal environment. The contemplative traditions across the major cultures of the world have engaged this thermal cosmic context with substantial sustained seriousness for thousands of years, before contemporary precision thermodynamics could measure the cosmic microwave background to its current precision. The Hindu prana and pranayama, the Buddhist tejas dhatu and anapanasati, the Christian pneuma and ruach, the Taoist chi and nidan, the Islamic nafas al-Rahman, the Jewish neshama, the Heraclitean fire and flux, the Stoic pneuma. These substantial, distinct traditional frameworks all converge on the recognition that the warmth of human existence is fundamentally continuous with the deeper thermal structure of cosmic reality itself. The convergence between these accumulated traditional accounts and the contemporary scientific findings is itself genuinely substantial empirical evidence that something deeply real about the nature of conscious thermal existence has been the consistent object of investigation across cultures and across many millennia of human history. The integrated picture nonetheless faces serious substantive objections that any honest engagement must address before drawing the practical implications that follow. We will examine the four major objections first, then turn to the practical implications of what has emerged. The first major substantive objection is the statistical reduction objection. The objection holds that the second law of thermodynamics is merely a statistical consequence of the underlying probabilistic behavior of vast numbers of microscopic particles, with entropy being merely a calculational convenience rather than a deep feature of reality. On this view, the apparent connection between the warmth of your body and the larger cosmic thermal economy is real at the purely physical level of energy transfer, but does not have any deeper metaphysical significance. The traditional accounts that find continuity between personal warmth and cosmic vital force are, on this critical view, projecting metaphysical significance onto what is actually a purely physical phenomenon describable entirely in materialist terms. The objection deserves serious, sustained engagement. Boltzmann's statistical interpretation of entropy is genuinely substantively correct, with the second law emerging from the statistical behavior of microscopic particles rather than being a separate fundamental physical law. The connection between body heat and cosmic thermal economy can, in principle, be described entirely in terms of energy transfer, without invoking any deeper metaphysical concepts. The substantial contemporary materialist framework has substantial, sustained empirical success and represents a coherent intellectual position that has been developed extensively across the contemporary scientific philosophical literature. The materialist objection has substantial difficulties of its own as well. The statistical interpretation of entropy does not actually explain why the universe began in such an extraordinarily low entropy state in the first place. The past hypothesis articulated by Roger Penrose at Oxford remains one of the genuinely deepest unresolved puzzles in cosmology, with the probability of the observed initial cosmic conditions on conventional probabilistic assumptions being approximately 1 chance in 10 to the power of 10 to the 123rd power. The materialist framework can describe the operation of the second law accurately, but cannot explain why the underlying conditions that allow the second law to be meaningful exist in the first place at all. The phenomenon known among contemporary cosmologists as the Boltzmann brain problem provides another striking illustration of the depth of these unresolved questions. The Boltzmann brain problem observes that on standard probabilistic assumptions about the universe, it would be vastly more probable for a fully formed conscious observer with apparent memories to fluctuate randomly into existence in a high entropy state than for the entire low entropy universe we actually observe to come into being. The fact that we apparently do observe a low-entropy universe rather than finding ourselves to be Boltzmann brains has been the subject of substantial, sustained, theoretical investigation, with no fully satisfactory resolution yet emerging within the purely materialist framework. The deeper questions about why physical reality has the specific thermal structure it actually has remain entirely unresolved within the purely materialist framework, and the substantial convergence between the traditional accounts and the contemporary findings provides genuine intellectual resources for thinking about these unresolved questions that pure materialism by itself simply does not have available. The second major substantive objection is the romantic projection objection. The objection holds that the connection between body heat and the original Big Bang is real at the purely physical level, but is being inflated into something more meaningful through the substantial influence of the contemplative traditions on contemporary interpretation. On this view, the cosmic microwave background photons interacting with your body do not actually represent any meaningful conversation between you and the early universe, but are simply scattered primordial radiation with no particular significance attached. The traditional frameworks that frame breath and warmth as substantive cosmic participation are projecting human meaning onto what is actually an entirely indifferent physical process. The romantic projection objection has genuine real force. The temptation to project human significance onto natural phenomena is well documented across the substantial history of human intellectual reflection. Many traditional accounts that initially seemed to anticipate scientific findings were actually inflating merely coincidental similarities into meaningful connections. The convergence between traditional accounts and contemporary thermodynamic findings could potentially be a similar inflation of coincidental similarities. The romantic projection objection has substantial limits as well. The genuinely substantial convergence across multiple independent traditional frameworks is not merely a single coincidence but a sustained pattern across diverse cultures. The Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Taoist, Islamic, Jewish, and Greek philosophical traditions all developed in entirely different cultural contexts through different methodological approaches, and the substantial convergence on similar accounts of the relationship between breath, warmth, and cosmic structure is itself substantial evidence that something genuinely real about human thermal existence is being investigated across these distinct cultural and methodological frameworks. The contemporary precise measurements provide specific empirical content that aligns substantively with what the traditions have been articulating, with the alignment being substantially more extensive than would be expected if the traditional accounts were merely projecting human meaning onto indifferent physical phenomena. The objection from romantic projection, therefore, does not eliminate the basic observation, but instead points to genuine substantive questions about how thoughtful engagement with the convergence should be conducted carefully. The third major substantive objection is the theological diversity objection. The objection holds that even if the substantial convergence between traditional accounts and contemporary findings is genuinely real, the substantial diversity of theological frameworks across the traditions undermines confidence in any specific interpretation of the underlying convergence. The Christian tradition consistently treats the connection between breath and divine creative activity as substantial evidence for the personal God of biblical revelation. The Hindu Vedantic tradition treats prana as cosmic life energy continuous with the impersonal Brahman. The Buddhist contemplative tradition treats Tejas Dhatu as a feature of dependently arising phenomena, rather than as evidence of any divine creative presence. The Taoist tradition treats qi as expression of the impersonal Tao, rather than of any personal creator deity. These different theological frameworks cannot all be straightforwardly correct simultaneously, and the substantial diversity of traditional engagement undermines confidence in any particular specific theological account. The theological diversity objection deserves careful, sustained response. The diversity of traditional theological frameworks is genuinely real and represents a substantive intellectual challenge for any specific theological commitment. The various traditions differ substantially in their specific metaphysical claims, and these substantive differences cannot simply be dissolved through facile ecumenical assertions of underlying unity. The diversity, nevertheless, has features that the objection does not adequately acknowledge. The various traditions converge substantially on certain key claims, even while differing substantially on others. All of these distinct accumulated traditions converge on the recognition that the warmth of human existence is not merely an isolated biological phenomenon, but is genuinely continuous with the deeper structures of reality. They all converge on the recognition that breath provides direct access to these underlying deeper structures. They all converge substantively on the substantive practical implication that contemplative engagement with breath and warmth produces substantive sustained transformation in the practitioner. The substantial convergence on these key features, even amid differences on more specific theological commitments, is itself substantial empirical evidence that something genuinely deeply real is being investigated across these distinct frameworks. The objection from theological diversity, therefore, does not undermine the basic finding, but instead points to substantive ongoing questions about how to navigate among the different traditional frameworks that engage these phenomena. Substantively, a fourth major substantive objection deserves engagement before we turn to the practical implications. This is the heat-death objection. The heat-death objection holds that the universe is moving inexorably toward a final state of maximum entropy in which all temperature differences have been entirely erased, and no thermodynamic work can be performed by any system. The current epoch in which conscious life can exist represents merely a brief temporary window in the substantially longer cosmic history. The cosmic conditions that allow your warmth and consciousness are merely temporary, and the eventual heat death of the universe means that all current meaning and significance will eventually be erased entirely into thermal equilibrium. The thermodynamic framework that currently allows for your existence ultimately implies the eventual erasure of everything that you and your existence currently depend upon. This heat-death objection carries genuine emotional and philosophical weight. The eventual fate of the universe under standard contemporary cosmological assumptions does involve the gradual exhaustion of usable concentrated energy and the eventual approach to total thermal equilibrium. Whether life and consciousness will be possible in the very distant cosmic future remains a genuinely open question that depends on details of cosmic evolution that are not yet fully understood by contemporary physics. The materialist framework that engages the Big Bang and the eventual heat-death together can produce a vision of cosmic existence that strikes many thoughtful contemporary people as deeply melancholy in its implications. The romantic projection objection has substantial limits as well. The current epoch in which biological life can exist is brief on cosmic timescales, but is substantial on the human timescales that actually matter for human existence. Your specific existence is occurring during this current cosmic epoch, and the eventual fate of the universe across timescales of 10 to the 14th power years and beyond does not actually eliminate the substantive meaning of what is occurring right now. The contemplative traditions across cultures have generally engaged the temporary character of human existence as a feature requiring substantive engagement, rather than as evidence against the possibility of meaning. The Buddhist sustained analysis of impermanence, the Christian engagement with mortality and resurrection, the Hindu framework of cyclic cosmic time and reincarnation, the Taoist embrace of natural transformation and flow. All of these accumulated traditional frameworks engage the temporary character of existence as part of what makes substantive meaning possible, rather than as substantive evidence. That meaning is fundamentally illusory. The Buddhist substantial analysis of impermanence, called anicca in Pali, and anitya in Sanskrit, treats the temporary character of every conditioned phenomenon as a feature, requiring substantive, sustained, contemplative engagement, rather than as evidence against the possibility of substantive meaning. The Buddha's foundational teaching that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent applies equally to individual embodied human existence and to the larger cosmic thermal economy itself. The heat-death objection points to genuine substantive features of cosmic evolution, but does not eliminate the substantive significance of the conscious thermal existence that occurs during the cosmic epoch when such existence is genuinely possible. We have now substantively addressed each of the four major substantive objections that any honest, sustained engagement must confront. We can now turn substantively to the practical implications of the integrated picture for thoughtful contemporary persons engaging seriously with these substantive foundational questions about thermal cosmic existence. The implications are not merely abstract, but bear directly on how a thoughtful person should orient themselves to their own embodied life given the integrated picture that has now emerged. The substantial ancient traditions and the contemporary scientific findings together provide accumulated resources for substantive integrated engagement that neither one alone could fully provide. The integrated picture connects substantively with the broader framework that contemporary physics has established about the deep structure of reality. The illusory character of time itself, on the deeper relativistic view, treats time as a feature of consciousness, traversing what is actually a unified four-dimensional structure rather than as the moving present that ordinary, unreflective experience suggests. The thermodynamic asymmetry that fundamentally defines the arrow of time within human experience is connected directly to the continuous increase of cosmic entropy across the entire history of the universe. The deep nature of human memory similarly connects directly to underlying thermodynamic structure, with the second law of thermodynamics establishing precisely why memory operates in one specific temporal direction rather than the other. The substantial fine-tuning of the fundamental constants of physics, including the precise calibration that allows for stable atoms and stable stars, represents one larger feature of cosmic structure that includes the cosmic thermal structure as one specific component. The conditions that allow your conscious existence are tied to a remarkable concatenation of cosmic features, with the thermal structure being just one feature among many that have apparently been precisely calibrated for the eventual emergence of conscious observers somewhere substantively within the cosmic structure. The deep substantive questions about how conscious choice operates within the mathematical structure that contemporary physics has documented connect directly to thermodynamics through the famous Maxwell demon thought experiment, which articulates the substantive deep relationship between consciousness, information processing, and thermodynamic order. The various vibrational mechanisms through which consciousness operates connect directly to underlying thermal structure, with the warmth of the body and the oscillations of neural firing both being specific, localized aspects of the larger vibrational context within which all conscious experience actually occurs. The substantive conditions under which conscious existence develops in human gestation include the specific thermal structure of pregnancy, with the warmth of the maternal body providing the actual substantive conditions under which embodied consciousness can actually develop. The cooling of the body at the moment of biological death represents one specific thermal transition within the larger continuity of substantial cosmic thermal processes, with the genuinely substantive question of whether consciousness persists beyond this thermal transition remaining among the deepest unresolved questions about the nature of conscious existence. The body's substantive capacity to receive information that exceeds local biological processes operates partly through thermal channels, with the cosmic microwave background and the cosmic neutrino background being specific concrete examples of substantial cosmic information continuously crossing through every embodied human existence. The integrated picture that emerges across all these substantial threads becomes genuinely substantive when assembled together. Physical reality is structured fundamentally according to precise sustained thermodynamic relationships that connect the most distant cosmic history directly to the immediate moment of your conscious experience right now. Consciousness itself operates within this thermodynamic structure through specific substantive mechanisms that continuously connect breath, body warmth, and information processing in the brain. The embodied life of any particular conscious being unfolds entirely within this larger thermal cosmic context, with the thermodynamic structure providing the substantive conditions under which conscious experience can occur, but not entirely exhausting what conscious experience actually involves. The substantive work of living well within this larger thermodynamic framework involves attending carefully to what is immediately here, while remembering, to whatever substantial extent is possible, the larger thermal cosmic context within which everything immediate is continuously occurring. The first major practical implication concerns the sustained attention to the breath as a substantive form of contemplative engagement. The accumulated contemplative traditions across cultures have developed sophisticated systematic practices for systematic attention to the breath, with these accumulated practices producing substantial experiential knowledge across thousands of years of sustained contemplative engagement. The contemporary precise substantive thermodynamic picture provides specific empirical content for what the traditions have been articulating about the breath for millennia of accumulated reflection. Sustained attention to the breath is therefore not merely psychological training, but is rather genuine substantive engagement with the actual physical interface between your living body and the larger thermal cosmic economy. The breath connects you continuously to the substantial thermal flow that has been operating across the cosmos since the original Big Bang. Sustained substantial attention to this connection provides direct experiential access to features of reality that purely conceptual reflection alone cannot access. The substantive practical effect of this sustained attention is genuinely substantial. The contemplative traditions have documented across thousands of years that systematic sustained attention to the breath produces specific substantive changes in conscious experience, with these changes including substantially increased equanimity, deeper integration of psychological functions, and direct experiential access to features of reality that ordinary unfocused awareness simply cannot encounter. The contemporary scientific investigation of contemplative practice has substantially confirmed many of these accumulated traditional observations, with the substantial accumulated contemporary empirical literature on mindfulness-based interventions documenting measurable improvements in psychological well-being and physical health for sustained, committed practitioners. The substantial integration of these accumulated traditional practices with contemporary scientific findings provides intellectual resources for engaging your own thermal existence that neither tradition nor science alone could fully provide. The second major practical implication concerns the substantive cultivation of awareness of cosmic context. The integrated picture established here suggests that your existence is not isolated from the larger cosmic thermal economy, but is continuously participating in it directly. The cosmic microwave background photons striking your body, the cosmic neutrinos continuously passing through your tissues, the thermal photons your body continuously emits into the surrounding space. All of these phenomena connect you continuously to the larger thermal cosmic context within which your existence is actually occurring. Substantively cultivating sustained awareness of this larger cosmic context can substantially shift the practitioner's daily lived experience of their own existence, with the substantive recognition that your warmth is genuinely continuous, with the full 13.8 billion years of accumulated cosmic thermal history, producing substantial changes in how the practitioner engages with their own embodied existence. The traditional frameworks across cultures have developed specific, systematic practices for substantively cultivating this kind of cosmic awareness. The Hindu practice of consistently recognizing prana as continuous with the universal cosmic life energy, the Buddhist contemplative practice of recognizing Tejas Dhatu as one fundamental element among the four primary elements that constitute physical reality at the deepest level, the Christian contemplative practice of recognizing the breath as substantive participation in the divine creative activity, the Taoist practice of recognizing qi as the substantive flow of the underlying Tao through reality, the Islamic Sufi practice of recognizing the breath as direct participation in the nafas, al-Rahman. All of these substantial accumulated practices represent specific systematic methods for cultivating sustained awareness of the breath, larger cosmic context. The contemporary substantive scientific picture provides specific empirical content that supports what these accumulated practices have been articulating across millennia of sustained engagement. The British physicist and theologian John Polkinghorne, who held the chair of mathematical physics at Cambridge before becoming an Anglican priest, articulated across his substantial published work the framework on which contemporary physics and accumulated theological reflection can be substantively integrated rather than treated as competing alternative accounts. Polkinghorne argued in his 1994 book, The Faith of a Physicist, and his subsequent writings, that the deep structure of physical reality, when carefully examined, is genuinely compatible with substantive theological commitments, with the substantial fine-tuning of cosmic structure being one specific feature that points beyond purely materialist interpretations. The substantial convergence between Polkinghorne's developed framework and the integrated picture established here deserves substantive attention, as one example of how contemporary thoughtful integration of physics and accumulated tradition is being conducted across the contemporary intellectual landscape. The third major practical implication concerns the substantive integration of warmth into sustained contemplative practice. The traditions across cultures have consistently recognized that warmth is not merely a passive byproduct of biological processes, but is rather an active phenomenon that can be deliberately cultivated, refined, and engaged through specific systematic contemplative methods. The Tibetan Buddhist tummo practice, the Taoist Naden internal alchemy tradition, the Hindu Kundalini yoga tradition, the Christian Eastern Orthodox Hesychast tradition, the various accumulated Sufi breathing practices, all of these substantial methods represent specific systematic approaches to working directly with the thermal phenomena of embodied existence. The contemporary scientific investigation of these practices has documented measurable, substantial physiological changes in committed practitioners, with the substantial accumulated evidence suggesting that warmth can indeed be deliberately cultivated and refined through systematic, sustained, contemplative practice. The substantive integration of warmth into contemplative practice is not a matter of merely generating heat for its own sake, but of substantively recognizing the thermal phenomena of your existence as direct points of access to the deeper, underlying structures of reality. The warmth of your body, when carefully attended to with sustained awareness, becomes a genuinely substantive doorway through which you can substantively engage features of reality that purely conceptual reflection alone cannot access. The accumulated traditional accounts have consistently maintained that systematic, sustained engagement with thermal phenomena produces substantive, sustained transformation in the practitioner, with the contemporary precise scientific measurements providing specific, substantive, empirical content for these accumulated traditional claims. The fourth major practical implication concerns the substantive recognition of life as a specific thermodynamic phenomenon. Your substantive continued existence depends on the continuous active processing of energy through your body, with low entropy energy being continuously captured from food and high entropy waste being continuously exported to the surrounding environment. The Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger articulated this insight powerfully in his 1944 book, What is Life?, arguing that living organisms feed on what he called negative entropy to maintain their organized state. You exist substantively as a dissipative structure maintained against the universal thermodynamic tendency toward disorder through the continuous active flow of energy through your biological system. This substantive recognition has substantial sustained implications for how you should genuinely understand your own existence. You are not actually separate from the cosmic thermal economy, but are rather one specific localized expression of that larger thermal economy. The food you eat, the air you continuously breathe, the water you drink, the heat you continuously radiate outward, the waste you produce. All of these are not actually separate phenomena, but are aspects of a single, integrated, continuous thermodynamic process that constitutes your ongoing continued existence. The substantive recognition of life as a specific thermodynamic phenomenon has direct practical implications for how you should engage with your own embodied existence. Your body is not a static possession that you have, but is rather a continuous process that you actively are. The food you continuously consume is not merely energetic fuel, but is rather the low entropy structure that actively allows your continued existence. The breath you continuously take is not merely biological respiration, but is direct participation in the substantial thermal flow that has been operating across the cosmos since the original Big Bang. The warmth you continuously radiate is not merely waste thermal heat, but is rather the substantive contribution of your particular existence to the larger cosmic thermal economy. These substantive accumulated recognitions can substantially and deeply shift how the thoughtful, contemporary person engages with the most ordinary daily features of embodied existence, with eating, continuous breathing, sleeping, and ordinary metabolism becoming substantive occasions for sustained, substantial awareness rather than merely automatic biological processes. The fifth major practical implication concerns the substantive framing of mortality within the larger thermodynamic cosmic context. Your living body will eventually cease to maintain the precise temperature gradient that currently sustains your conscious existence. The continuous metabolic processes that produce your warmth will eventually cease entirely, and your body will gradually cool toward thermal equilibrium with the surrounding environment. This eventual thermal transition is not a separate phenomenon from the rest of your existence, but is the substantive thermodynamic continuation of the same processes that have been occurring continuously throughout your life. The substantive recognition of mortality within this thermodynamic framework can substantially shift how the thoughtful person engages with the eventual end of their own embodied existence. The contemplative traditions have developed substantial accumulated wisdom for substantively engaging mortality within frameworks that take seriously the larger thermodynamic and cosmic context of all human existence. The substantial accumulated Buddhist contemplation of death, the Christian sustained engagement with mortality through the resurrection narrative, the Hindu framework of cyclic existence and substantial reincarnation, the Taoist embrace of natural cosmic transformation, the Islamic substantial engagement with the divine return at death. All of these substantial accumulated frameworks engage mortality, not as evidence against meaning, but as part of what actually makes substantive meaning possible within embodied human existence. The contemporary precise thermodynamic picture provides specific, substantive empirical content for what these accumulated frameworks have been articulating, with the substantive recognition that the cooling of the body at death is one specific thermal transition within a substantially larger cosmic thermal economy that does not depend on any particular individual embodied existence for its continuation. We can now substantively consider what all of this means specifically for you, the particular person actually encountering this material right now at this moment. Your body at 310 Kelvin is currently maintaining the substantial temperature gradient that allows your continued conscious existence. The warmth currently radiating from your skin at this very moment is the most recent expression of a thermodynamic process that began 13.8 billion years ago at the original Big Bang event and has been continuously occurring across the entire subsequent 13 billion years of cosmic history. The breath continuously moving in and out of your lungs as you read these words is direct participation in the larger thermal flow that operates continuously throughout the cosmos. The hydrogen atoms in your body have existed essentially unchanged for 13.8 billion years and will continue to exist across cosmic timescales extending substantially beyond your particular embodied existence. The cosmic microwave background photons currently striking your body and the cosmic neutrinos currently passing through your tissues at this moment are direct, substantive continuations of the original thermal event that produced the entire universe itself. The substantive deep recognition that your existence at this moment is genuinely continuous with the larger cosmic thermal economy has substantial implications for how you should genuinely understand your own life. You are not actually an isolated thermal system that merely happens to exist within a larger universe. You are rather a localized expression of the larger universe that happens to take the specific form of conscious existence at this particular present cosmic epoch. Your individual warmth is not separate from the larger cosmic warmth, but is genuinely continuous with it. Your individual breath is not separate from the cosmic flow, but is rather one specific, localized participation in it. The substantial traditional frameworks across cultures have been articulating these deep connections for thousands of years, and the contemporary precise measurements have now provided specific, substantive empirical content for what the accumulated traditions have been saying. The implications for how you should substantively engage with your own life are direct and genuinely substantive. The breath you take at this very moment connects you continuously to the larger thermal flow that has been continuously operating since the original Big Bang. Sustained substantial attention to this breath provides direct, experiential access to features of reality that purely conceptual reflection alone cannot access. The warmth you currently feel pressing against the inside of your skin is genuinely continuous with the cosmic warmth that has been gradually cooling across the cosmos since the original Big Bang. Sustained substantial attention to this warmth provides direct experiential access to your continuous participation in the larger cosmic thermal economy. The substantial traditional contemplative practices that have been developed across cultures provide systematic accumulated methods for substantively cultivating this kind of sustained attention, with the contemporary scientific findings providing additional substantive empirical resources for understanding what these practices actually accomplish. The substantive work that ultimately remains is genuinely your own to undertake personally and entirely. The accumulated contemplative traditions provide substantial accumulated wisdom, developed across thousands of years of sustained substantive engagement. The contemporary, precise scientific findings now provide specific, substantive empirical content for what the traditions have been articulating across millennia. The substantive integration of these accumulated resources into a sustained engagement with your own thermal existence is genuinely your own task, with no one else genuinely able to undertake this fundamental substantive work for you in your place. The continuous breath you take, the warmth you actually feel, the substantive, sustained attention you can substantively bring to these phenomena, these are the actual substantive materials of the substantial work that the integrated picture now places directly before you. You are warm right now at this very moment. The warmth is genuinely real. The warmth is continuous, with the full 13.8 billion years of accumulated cosmic thermal history. The contemplative traditions have been articulating what this means for thousands of years of sustained engagement. The contemporary precise measurements have now provided specific substantive empirical content for what they have been saying. The substantive deep integration is genuinely yours to undertake. Your body is currently approximately 37 degrees Celsius. Your body is approximately 310 Kelvin on the absolute physical scale. The cosmic microwave background fills space at approximately 2.725 Kelvin. The substantial temperature gradient between your body and the cosmic background is precisely what allows your continued existence as a conscious being. The gradient has been gradually establishing itself across the full 13.8 billion years of substantial cosmic cooling. You exist at this very specific moment because the cosmic thermal economy has the specific structure it actually has. Your individual warmth is not actually separate from the cosmic warmth. Your individual breath is not actually separate from the cosmic flow. The contemplative traditions have been telling humanity what this means for thousands of years of accumulated reflection. The contemporary precise measurements are now providing specific substantive empirical content for what the traditions have been articulating. The substantive integration of these accumulated intellectual resources into a sustained engagement with your own embodied existence is your own work to undertake. Breathe consciously now. Feel the warmth genuinely pressing against the inside of your own skin. Recognize substantively that this warmth is actually continuous with the warmth that has been operating across all of cosmic history. Recognize substantively that the very breath you are taking right now is direct participation in the substantial thermal flow that has been continuous across the cosmos since the original Big Bang. Recognize that your existence is not actually isolated, but is rather one specific localized expression of the larger cosmic thermal economy. The work begins now. The substantive breath continues steadily. The warmth persists continuously. The larger cosmic thermal economy continues to operate substantively across the cosmos. You are actively participating in it at this very moment. The substantive participation is what your continued existence essentially consists of. Walk well within the precisely calibrated thermal cosmos that has made substantive specific room for your continued conscious existence at this very moment. Walk with the substantive recognition that your warmth is genuinely continuous with the full 13.8 billion years of accumulated cosmic thermal history. Walk with a substantial sustained awe that this deep continuity actually deserves. Walk with the substantive seriousness that the deepest questions about your thermal existence actually require. Walk with the substantial openness that what remains genuinely unknown still requires of any honest, thoughtful person. The substantive breath continues steadily. The substantive warmth persists genuinely. The substantive work substantively begins right now at this very moment.